The morning sun blazed merciless over the cracked earth of Devil's Canyon, where Marcus Thorne had carved out a life from dust and stubbornness. His ranch sat like a forgotten prayer in the vastness, a collection of weathered buildings that spoke of 20 years of solitude and silent penance. The windmill creaked its eternal song, pumping water from depths that seemed to mirror the buried secrets in his chest. Marcus had chosen this isolation deliberately. After what happened at Sand Creek, after the screams that still echoed in his dreams, he needed the silence. The desert asked no questions, demanded no explanations, offered no forgiveness, only the brutal honesty of survival. His cattle grazed sparse grass between the sagebrush, and his horses stood patient in the corral, their eyes reflecting the same weary acceptance that had settled into his bones. The woman appeared on a Tuesday morning like a mirage that refused to fade. She stood at the edge of his property line, swaying slightly in the heat, her long black hair whipping across her face like a battle flag. Even from a distance, Marcus could see she was Apache. The way she held herself, the careful positioning that spoke of someone who had learned to read danger in every shadow. She wore a torn cavalry jacket over a doeskin dress, and her left arm hung at an odd angle, clearly broken. Behind her, scattered across the ridge like fallen stars, lay the bodies of soldiers. Blue uniforms stained dark with blood, horses sprawled motionless in the dust. A patrol, maybe 8 men, caught by surprise and overwhelmed. The woman had survived whatever happened here, but barely. She watched Marcus with eyes that held the weight of recent violence and something deeper, a recognition that made his blood run cold. He approached slowly, hands visible and empty, speaking in the handful of Apache words he had learned from a trader years ago. She did not respond, only swayed more violently, and he realized she was about to collapse. When she fell, he caught her body burning with fever, her breath coming in sharp gasps. Up close, he could see the extent of her injuries, not just the broken arm, but deep cuts across her ribs, rope burns on her wrists, and something that looked like a brand on her shoulder. Marcus carried her to the house, his mind racing. Harboring an Apache woman, especially one found at the scene of a cavalry massacre, was a death sentence. But as he laid her on his bed and began to clean her wounds, he found himself remembering other moments, other choices. Sand Creek had taught him the weight of doing nothing, of following orders without question. This time, he would choose differently. For 3 days, she burned with fever. Marcus stayed by her side, forcing water between her cracked lips, changing bandages and fighting the infection that threatened to claim her. She spoke only in delirium, fragments of Apache mixed with English, words that painted pictures of fire and running, of a village destroyed and families scattered. When the fever finally broke, she opened her eyes and looked at him with such fierce intelligence that he felt momentarily breathless. "You are the soldier," she said, her English accented but clear. "From the fort." Marcus nodded slowly. "I was. Not anymore." She studied his face, searching for something. "You were there, when they came for the children." The words hit him like a physical blow. Sand Creek. She had been there, had seen what he had been part of, the massacre that had driven him from the army, from civilization, from any hope of redemption. He waited for her accusation, for the hatred he deserved, but instead she simply closed her eyes again. "Why did you not kill me?" she asked softly. "Because I've done enough killing for one lifetime," he replied, and meant it more than he had ever meant anything. Her name, she told him on the 5th day, was Ayana. Life, breath, eternal. The name carried the weight of her people's hope, their belief that even in the darkest times, something would endure. She had been captured during a raid, held by the cavalry for weeks, while they tried to extract information about her band's location. The patrol had been transporting her to a larger fort when her people had found them. In the chaos of the rescue, she had been injured, left behind when the others fled. "They thought I was dead," she said, her voice matter-of-fact. "Perhaps it was better that way. Marcus found himself drawn to her quiet strength, the way she bore pain without complaint, the careful way she moved through his small world as if learning its rhythms. She helped where she could, despite her injuries, mending his clothes with skilled fingers, tending his meager garden, bringing a kind of order to his chaos. In return, he shared what he knew of medicine, of reading, of the small comforts that made isolation bearable. The nights were the hardest. She would sit by the window, staring out at the desert, and he could feel the weight of her grief filling the small room. Sometimes she would speak of her family, a husband killed at Sand Creek, 2 children she had lost to disease, a father who had been a peace chief before the wars began. Her voice carried no bitterness, only the hollow ache of someone who had learned to live with unbearable loss. "I dream of them," she said one night, her silhouette outlined against the stars. "They call to me, tell me to come home, but I do not know where home is anymore." Marcus understood. He had been searching for the same thing for years, that sense of belonging that had died with his innocence. "Maybe home isn't a place," he said carefully. "Maybe it's just peace." She turned to look at him, and in the moonlight he saw tears on her cheeks. "I have forgotten what peace feels like." The first sign of trouble came on a scorching July morning when dust clouds appeared on the eastern horizon. Too organized to be a dust devil, too large to be a single rider. Marcus grabbed his spyglass and climbed to the roof of the barn, his heart sinking as the shapes resolved into clarity. Cavalry. A full troop, maybe 30 men, riding hard toward his ranch. He scrambled down and found Ayanna already packing supplies into a saddlebag. She had seen them too, had read the signs with the same instinct that had kept her alive this long. But even as she moved with practiced efficiency, Marcus could see the resignation in her shoulders, the way she had already accepted that this small sanctuary was ending. "The canyon," he said quickly. "There's a cave system about 5 miles north. You can hide there until they pass." She stopped packing and looked at him steadily. "And you?" "I'll tell them I haven't seen anyone. Buy you time to get clear." Ayanna shook her head. "They will not believe you. And when they search—" She gestured toward the house where small signs of her presence lingered. A woman's touch in the arrangement of dried herbs, the mended clothes, the careful way she had organized his chaotic existence. Marcus felt something cold and familiar settle in his chest. The same feeling he had carried into Sand Creek, the weight of impossible choices. But this time, he would not be a passive participant in someone else's tragedy. This time, he would fight. "Then we leave together," he said. "Both of us." The cavalry reached the ranch just as the sun hit its zenith. Marcus stood on the porch, rifle cradled casually in his arms, watching as the troops spread out in a practiced formation. Their leader, a captain with prematurely grey hair and the rigid bearing of a career soldier, dismounted and approached with the confidence of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "Captain Morrison, Fort Garland," the man announced. "We're tracking an escaped Apache prisoner. Female, about 25, wounded. She was last seen in this area." Marcus kept his expression neutral. "Can't say I've seen anyone matching that description, Captain. Been pretty quiet out here." Morrison's eyes swept the ranch, taking in details with the practiced gaze of a man who had learned to read deception. "Mind if we take a look around?" "Standard procedure." "Help yourself," Marcus replied, stepping aside. "Though I warn you, I'm not much of a housekeeper." The soldiers spread out, searching the buildings with methodical thoroughness. Marcus watched them work, his grip tightening on his rifle as they moved closer to the hidden root cellar where Ayanna waited. The space was cramped, barely large enough for one person, and he knew she would be struggling to breathe in the confined darkness. "Thorne," Morrison said suddenly, his voice carrying a note of recognition. "Marcus Thorne. You served with the 3rd Colorado." Marcus nodded carefully. "That's right." "Sand Creek?" "I was there." Morrison studied him with new interest. "Heard you left the service rather suddenly after that. Some said you lost your nerve." The words were meant to provoke, to push him toward some reaction that would reveal his guilt. Marcus had heard similar accusations before, had learned to let them slide past without response. But now, with Ayanna hidden beneath his feet and 30 armed men searching his home, the familiar shame transformed into something harder. "I lost something," he said quietly, "but it wasn't my nerve." One of the soldiers called out from the barn, holding up a piece of cloth, duskin with the distinctive beadwork of the Apache. Marcus recognized it immediately. A torn piece from Ayanna's dress, something she must have lost during those first fevered days. Morrison examined it with satisfaction, his suspicions confirmed. "Seems you've been entertaining guests after all, Thorne," he said, his voice hardening. "Where is she?" Marcus met his gaze steadily. "I told you I haven't seen anyone." Morrison nodded to his men, and suddenly Marcus found himself surrounded by cocked rifles. The captain's face had transformed from professional courtesy to cold determination. "Let me explain something to you, ex-soldier. That Apache woman killed 8 of my men, cut their throats while they slept. She's dangerous, and anyone helping her is guilty of aiding the enemy." "Maybe those soldiers had it coming," Marcus said, the words escaping before he could stop them. The slap came hard and fast, snapping his head to the side. Morrison's face was flushed with anger, but his voice remained controlled. "You're going to tell me where she is, or we're going to tear this place apart, board by board. And when we find her, you're going to watch while we make her pay for what she did." Marcus spat blood into the dust and straightened, meeting Morrison's gaze with defiance that surprised them both. "Go to hell, Captain." The beating was methodical, professional. Morrison's men knew how to inflict pain without causing permanent damage, how to break a man's will without killing him. They worked in silence, taking turns with fists and rifle butts, while Marcus gritted his teeth and refused to speak. Through the haze of pain, he could hear them searching, moving closer to the root cellar. It was the youngest soldier, barely 18 and clearly uncomfortable with the violence, who found the hidden entrance. He called out nervously, and Morrison left off his interrogation to investigate. Marcus watched in growing desperation as they pried up the wooden boards, revealing the dark space beneath. Ayanna emerged with dignity intact, climbing out of the cellar with her head held high despite the rifle barrels trained on her. She had braided her hair back and cleaned the dust from her clothes, preparing herself for whatever came next. When she saw Marcus, bloodied and beaten, her composure cracked for just a moment. "You should have let me go," she said softly, her voice carrying both gratitude and grief. "Wouldn't have made a difference," Marcus replied, struggling to his feet. "They were always going to find you." Morrison stepped between them, his satisfaction evident. "Well, well, the killer and her protector. This is going to look very good in my report." He turned to his men. "String them both up, the Apache for murder, the traitor for treason." The soldiers moved to comply, but something in the air had changed, a tension that had nothing to do with the drama playing out in the ranch yard. One of the men on perimeter duty called out, pointing toward the ridgeline. Marcus followed his gaze and felt his blood turn to ice. They came over the hill like a force of nature, 300 mounted warriors spread across the ridge in a line that seemed to stretch forever. Apache, Comanche, and Kiowa riding together in a confederation that spoke of desperate times and desperate alliances. The morning sun caught their weapons, their war paint, the fury in their eyes as they looked down at the scene below. Morrison's face went white. "Jesus Christ," he whispered. The warriors began to move down the slope, not charging but advancing with inexorable purpose. Their leader, a tall man with silver hair and scars that spoke of countless battles, rode slightly ahead of the others. He wore a mixture of traditional Apache clothing and captured cavalry gear, and his eyes were fixed on the soldiers with absolute hatred. "Cochise," Ayanna breathed, and Marcus heard both hope and fear in her voice. Morrison was shouting orders, trying to form his men into a defensive position, but 30 cavalry against 300 warriors was mathematics that offered no comfort. The soldiers were brave, disciplined, but they were also far from reinforcements and facing odds that made heroism irrelevant. "Let us go!" Marcus called out, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent yard. "Let us go, and maybe they'll let you live." Morrison spun on him, desperation replacing confidence. "You think you can negotiate with savages?" "I think those savages are here for her," Marcus replied, nodding toward Ayana, "and I think you've got about 2 minutes before they decide talking is pointless." The captain's eyes darted between the approaching warriors and his trapped position. Professional training warred with survival instinct, and for a moment Marcus thought he might actually listen to reason. Then pride won out, and Morrison raised his rifle. "We don't negotiate with killers," he snarled. The shot that killed him came from the ridge, a single bullet that took him in the chest and spun him around like a child's toy. The warriors had moved within range while he hesitated, and their marksmen were as skilled as any in the army. Morrison dropped to his knees, looked down at the spreading bloodstain on his uniform, and fell forward into the dust. What followed was not a battle, but a rout. The soldiers, leaderless and outnumbered, scattered in panic. Some tried to reach their horses, others sought cover behind the ranch buildings, but the warriors were everywhere, surrounding them with practiced efficiency. The fighting was brief and brutal, decided by numbers and surprise rather than courage. Marcus threw himself over Ayana as bullets flew, shielding her with his body while chaos erupted around them. He felt the heat of projectiles passing overhead, heard the screams of wounded men and horses, smelled the acrid smoke of gunpowder mixed with desert dust. When the shooting stopped, the silence was deafening. Cochise himself dismounted and walked toward them, his moccasins silent on the blood-soaked earth. He was older than Marcus had expected, his face lined with age and grief, but his eyes held the fire of a man who had never learned to surrender. He looked at Ayana first, speaking in rapid Apache, his voice carrying relief and reproach in equal measure. Ayana responded in the same language, her words flowing like water after drought. Marcus caught fragments, explanations, apologies, something that sounded like gratitude. Cochise's expression softened as he listened, and when she was finished, he turned his attention to Marcus. "You saved my daughter," he said in English, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. "Why?" Marcus met his gaze steadily. "Because she needed saving. You are a soldier. You were at Sand Creek." It was not a question. Marcus nodded, waiting for judgment, for the punishment he had carried in his heart for years. Instead, Cochise studied him with something that might have been curiosity. "Many soldiers were there," the chief said slowly. "Most still carry their guns against my people, but you carry only guilt." "Guilt doesn't bring back the dead," Marcus replied. "No," Cochise agreed, "but it can prevent new deaths if it is carried by the right man." The old chief looked around at the carnage, at the bodies of Morrison's men scattered across the ranch yard. His warriors were already gathering weapons and horses, preparing to leave before reinforcements could arrive. This had been a rescue, not a conquest, and they all knew that staying would only invite retaliation. "You will come with us," Cochise said to Ayana. "Your place is with your people." She nodded, but Marcus saw the pain in her eyes, the choice between duty and desire, between obligation and love. She had found something here, in this harsh and simple place, that had begun to heal the wounds in her soul. Now she was being asked to give it up for the greater good of her tribe. "I understand," she said quietly. "Do you?" Cochise asked, and there was something in his voice that made Marcus look up sharply. "Because I think you have found something here that is worth more than duty, something that might heal both our people's wounds." The chief turned to Marcus, his expression serious. "You can stay here, and they will come for you. The army does not forget, and they will not forgive what happened today. Or you can come with us, and live as we live, free but always moving, always fighting." Marcus looked at Ayana, at the hope dawning in her eyes, and felt something shift in his chest. The weight he had carried for so long, the burden of unforgivable acts and impossible choices, seemed suddenly lighter. Not gone, but transformed into something that could be born. "I choose her," he said simply. Cochise nodded as if he had expected no other answer. "Then you choose well. Love is the only thing that survives war." They rode out as the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, leaving behind the ranch that had been Marcus's refuge and prison for so many years. He took nothing but his rifle, his horse, and the woman who had become his salvation. The 300 warriors flowed around them like a protective tide, and for the first time in years, Marcus felt like he was part of something larger than his own guilt. The desert ahead was vast and uncertain, full of dangers and promises in equal measure. But as Ayana rode beside him, her hand reaching out to touch his arm, Marcus knew that home was not a place, but a choice. And he had finally chosen well. They traveled for weeks, following ancient trails known only to the Apache, moving through landscapes that seemed to exist outside of time. The Confederation gradually dispersed, warriors returning to their own bands, but Cochise's group remained large and strong. They welcomed Marcus with cautious respect, recognizing that anyone willing to defy the army for love had earned the right to ride among them. Ayana taught him the rhythms of nomadic life, how to read the desert's moods, how to find water in seemingly barren places, how to move with the wind instead of against it. In return, he shared his knowledge of military tactics, helping the band avoid cavalry patrols and stay ahead of the relentless pursuit that never seemed to end. The nights were the best times. As they sat around small fires, sharing stories and dreams, Marcus felt the last of his old life falling away. The man who had ridden into Sand Creek, who had carried out orders without question, was becoming someone else. Someone who could look at the stars without seeing the faces of the dead. "What do you see when you look at me?" Ayana asked one night, as they lay together under the infinite sky. Marcus considered the question, tracing the outline of her face with his finger. "I see strength," he said finally. "I see someone who survived the worst things people can do to each other and still chose to love." She smiled, and in the starlight, he could see the girl she had been before the wars, before the loss, before the world had tried to break her. "I see the same in you," she whispered, "a man who chose to become better than he was." As autumn turned to winter, they found themselves in the hidden valleys of the Sierra Madre, where the air was thin and clean and the army's reach was limited. Here, among the high peaks and secret springs, the Apache had built a different kind of sanctuary. Not permanent, but enduring, a place where children could play without fear, where the old ways could be preserved and honored. Ayana told him she was pregnant on the first day of snow, the words coming soft and scared in the pre-dawn darkness. Marcus held her close, feeling the miracle of new life growing between them, and knew that this was why he had survived everything. The war, the guilt, the long years of isolation. To be here, in this moment, with this woman who had saved his soul. "What will we name the child?" he asked, his voice thick with emotion. "If it is a girl," she said, "I will call her Itzel. It means rainbow, because she will be the bridge between our worlds." Marcus kissed her forehead, tasting salt and snow and the promise of tomorrow. "And if it is a boy?" Ayana smiled, her hand moving to rest on her still flat belly. "Then he will be Marcus, after his father. Because some names are worth carrying forward." The child came with the spring, a daughter with her mother's dark eyes and her father's stubborn jaw. Itzel Rainbow Thorne, born free in the mountains, where eagles nested and the wind sang ancient songs. She was perfect, beautiful, and as Marcus held her for the first time, he felt the last of his old anger dissolve into something that felt like grace. They built a small cabin in a hidden valley, close enough to the main camp for safety, but far enough for privacy. Marcus learned to work with leather and metal, crafting tools and weapons that the band needed. Ayana became known as a healer, her knowledge of herbs and bodies saving lives that might otherwise have been lost. They found their place in the community, not as outsiders, but as members of something larger than themselves. The army never stopped hunting them, but the desert was vast, and the Apache were skilled at becoming invisible. Patrols would pass within miles of their hidden camps, following cold trails and false leads, while the people they sought lived and loved and raised children in the spaces between their footsteps. "Do you ever regret it?" Ayana asked one evening, as they watched their daughter take her first steps. "Leaving your old life behind?" Marcus considered the question as he had many times before. The answer came easier now, without the weight of doubt that had once made him hesitate. "My old life was already dead," he said. "You just helped me bury it." Years passed in the hidden valley, marked by seasons and celebrations, by the growth of their daughter and the deepening of their love. Marcus's hair began to show grey, and lines appeared around Ayana's eyes, but they had found something that transcended the passage of time. They had found peace. The war between the Apache and the army finally ended, not with victory or defeat, but with exhaustion. Treaties were signed, reservations established, and the great confederation that had once ruled the desert was slowly broken apart. But in their hidden valley, Marcus and Ayana remained free, guardians of a love that had survived everything history could throw at it. On quiet evenings, when the wind carried the scent of sage and the sound of their daughter's laughter, Marcus would sometimes think about the ranch where it all began, the place where a broken soldier and a wounded woman had found each other in the vastness of the desert. It was gone now, reclaimed by sand and time, but its memory lived on in the family they had built from nothing but choice and courage. "Tell me the story again," Itzel would ask, her English and Apache equally fluent, her understanding of both worlds complete. "Tell me how you and Mama met." And Marcus would tell her, as he had told her before and would tell her again, the story of how love had conquered hate, how choice had defeated destiny, how two people from different worlds had created something entirely new. It was a story worth telling, worth remembering, worth passing on to the next generation. In the end, that was all any of them could do: tell their stories, love their children, and hope that somewhere in the vast desert of human experience, someone else would find the courage to choose love over hate, hope over despair, life over death. The land would endure, the wind would blow, and the stories would continue, carried forward by voices that refused to be silenced. And in a hidden valley, where eagles nested and the wind sang ancient songs, a family born from the impossible continued to prove that some things were stronger than history, more enduring than hate, and more powerful than the forces that tried to tear them apart. They had found their home at last, not in any place, but in each other, and that was enough.